Those that know me know that I am a massive Star Wars fan, so it was inevitable that I was going to do a 1 week project that was based in the Star Wars universe. Biggest question is, what I'm going to do? G'day and welcome back to Weekaholic. My name's Tom, and in this very special Star Wars Day episode, I'm going to attempt to build an entire Mandalorian suit of armour in just 1 week. This is by far the biggest project I've ever taken on. I've got no idea if I'm going to complete it. In fact, I think I'll need a small miracle just to get to the end. Let's get into it. I knew that the centerpiece of the costume was going to be the helmet, and I didn't want to try and shape this myself out of heat-formed plastic or foam, as I knew the results would never be convincing. With this in mind, at the start of day 1, I spent about half the day 3D modelling the helmet in Blender and preparing it for 3D printing. Given the size of the helmet, I had to break it into 8 parts which would be glued together later. The printing was also going to take some time, which is why I decided to get started as soon as possible. With some careful measurements of my head complete, I started the first part of the helmet on the printer and commenced building the other hard parts of the armour. Ideally, I would have 3D printed every hard part of the armour, however, there's just not going to be enough time in the week to do that. Instead, I'll make all of the other hard parts out of extruded PVC. This is a heat-formable plastic which can be cut with a knife, so it makes it ideal to be able to make the larger parts of the armour quickly. Hot glue is the best friend of a costume maker, and I've used it liberally all over the suit, but specifically it gives a great hold for the extruded PVC parts. On the completion of day 1, I was incredibly happy with my progress. I had the helmet modelled and printing, and had most of the chest piece built out of PVC, and was quietly confident that the rest of the costume would be a breeze. Day 2 started as the last had ended, working on the hard parts of the armour. I completed the chest piece and moved on to the thigh guards, which were relatively straightforward. I then decided to tackle the pauldrons. Like the other parts, I first designed them in Blender, created a template, printed them out and transferred them to the PVC. The problem with the pauldrons was that they were far more complex than the other pieces of armour. I spent the entire second half of the day trying to get the shape to work, but was never able to get anything close to what I was hoping to achieve. It was a frustrating end to day 2, and it felt like I'd just wasted a massive amount of time. Given how much of the costume was left, I was starting to feel a little less confident about my prospects. Frustrated by my inability to get the pauldrons done, I decided to shift gears and get a start on the soft parts of the costume to start day 3. While I think the hard armour parts are what really show off the costume, the soft parts are as equally important, as they add layers to the costume which help to make it really sell. As with all of my projects, I wanted to do everything myself, so instead of just buying a tracksuit to put underneath, I decided I would sew up the base flight suit myself. I used a flight suit I had on hand which I knew fitted me to work out the sizing, and then spent all of day 3 sewing the suit together, adding decorative stitches to try and match the reference. This took a whole lot longer than I had expected, so by the end of day 3 I had an almost complete flight suit, but was far behind where I'd expected to be. I was still feeling the costume would be achievable by the end of the week, but I was starting to worry that I'd have to make some serious concessions as I went along. I continued to work on the flight suit to start day 4 and got it to a point where I figured it was good enough. Honestly, I wasn't at all happy with what I'd made, as it was a bit awkward fitting and not at all polished, but I decided that I couldn't sink any more time into the flight suit, and hoped that the other pieces on top would hide the relatively average job I'd done. It was about the middle of day 4 as well that the final parts of the helmet had finished printing. Given my poor initial attempt at heat forming the pauldrons, as well as the fact that the printer was now free, I spent about half an hour modelling a 3D printable version of the pauldron in Blender, and then got that started on the printer. I then got started on the belt with some fake leather. The problem with this was that it had some stretchiness to it, so I had to use a specific type of stitch on my sewing machine. I wasted a couple of hours trying to get it sewing correctly, so at the end of day 4 I was really starting to feel as if I was far behind. My motivation was waning, and I felt as if the final costume was just going to look terrible. The helmet was still in pieces, the other armour parts were unfinished, I hated the flight suit, and I was well behind the curve on the other pieces that I needed to make, so to say I was feeling deflated about my progress would be an understatement. I continued working on the belt at the start of day 5, and while it took a bit of time, the results were at least somewhat polished, and I was reasonably happy with what I'd come up with. I then moved on to the soft grey parts of the armour, which were generally straightforward. If I was to do this again, I'd likely use EVA foam for these parts, as the fabric and stitching don't really sell as well as I'd like. However, there was no time to rectify this. I also got onto making the vest that the chest piece, pauldrons and cape would attach to. I could have skipped this step and just attached everything to the base flight suit, but I wanted to have as many layers as possible, as this can really help sell the costume as realistic. I spent the last hour of the day sanding and gluing all of the parts of the helmet together with 5-minute epoxy. I was relieved to see that they fitted together reasonably well, and that I'd been correct with my sizing, as the helmet was a comfortable fit, but not too oversized. I started day 6 by filling the now glued helmet with an air drying filler. This is important as I needed to smooth out the layer lines caused by the 3D printing process. After the filler had dried, I got to sanding. This was a long and unpleasant process, and I really only got the helmet to about 75% of what I'd like in terms of smoothness. However, given how quickly the end of the week was approaching, and given how much I had left to do, I got it to a good enough state and prepped it for painting. After a couple coats of filler primer, I painted a first gloss black coat and then a chrome paint. The paint does an okay job of suggesting that the helmet is metal from a distance, but it really kind of breaks down when you get up close. If I had a week to spend on the helmet alone, I would have sanded it to a far smoother surface and then tried some other methods for getting the metal shine. However, it was good enough for now. Finishing the helmet had taken all day, and I was now working well into the evenings to try and get everything finished in time. The pauldrons had now finished printing, so I designed and started printing the gauntlets, as these proved too complex for the heat-formed plastic. I actually only managed to get one printed, and it was a rush job that ended up too small, but it had to do as I had no time left to print a replacement. I had zero confidence that I could get the costume done by the end of day 7, but I was going to give myself every chance. I started by filling, sanding, prepping and painting the pauldrons, as well as painting the other hard parts of the armour. I also needed to get a visor for the helmet. Most cosplayers I've seen use a tinted face guard, however I couldn't find anything like this in my area. I eventually found a grey clear plastic tray at a local discount shop, and was really hoping that it could be heat formed without any issues. To my massive relief, this plastic worked fantastically, and I ended up using 2 layers to ensure that the visor was dark enough. Seeing the finished helmet really helped me power through to the end of the day, and at about 10:30 at night I started to do a quick weathering pass on all of the hard parts. This was a total rush job that really didn't produce what I was hoping for, but added a little something nonetheless. At just after midnight on the 7th day, I was able to put the completed costume on for the first time.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. Where did the gloves, shin guards and cape come from?
Well, the gloves I just forgot to film, but the shin guards and the cape I wasn't able to get complete within the week. I left the shin guards till last because I consider them the least important part of the costume, and the cape I simply just forgot about. I did these after the week was up, and they added about an extra half a day of work, so in total there's about 7.5 days of work in the suit. I'm really excited with what I've come up with, and I'm excited to build on it in the future. If you like what you saw, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to check out my other videos. Thanks for watching, and as always, till next time.